Right. I'm gonna go. It's tough. I'm gonna. I don't know why my computer's acting. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go Usos. I'm gonna go Usos.
Why?
I don't know what the hell's going on here.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bret the Hitman Hart has just walked in to the Cheap Heat podcast.
This is unbelievable.
There he is, the best there is, the best there was. Have a seat, Bret. Bret the Hitman Hart has showed up.
What's going on?
Stat guy Greg, have a seat over there.
I am losing my mind right now.
Did Griff produce you on what you were tell you on what you were walking into right now, that you were about to meet your biggest fan ever?
No, I'm completely blind. I have no idea.
SGG, what do you have to say to the Hitman?
What do you say? First of all, thank you. Like, really, thank you for everything. Like, you're my biggest. I can't even speak right now. This is incredible. I'm sitting next to the greatest, the GOAT.
I know. We all know. Everyone listening knows how you feel.
I lost friends over my love of Bret Hart.
Well, they weren't friends with me.
Exactly. Those aren't real friends. Now, Bret, you are in town for an event that is going down tonight. If you want to get to see Bret Hart in person, you have that opportunity to do so. It is going down high intensity from the NYC Arena, House of Glory. It is a big night. Jamaica, New York. Bret, you're on the show tonight.
I'm coming out and going to say a few words.
All right, yeah. You're not going to get in the ring tonight.
Not tonight. Not that I'm expecting. You never know. With wrestling, it's always an open-ended.
That's exactly right. But there's a meet and greet, correct? A 5:30? 5:30 meet and greet if you want to meet the Hitman, Bret Hart, like SGG just did, and be.
This is incredible. This is a moment.
I know. Bret, how you been, man? I haven't seen you in a little while. How you been?
I've been really good. I've been excellent. I'm on the rebound.
I follow your adventures around the world. You and your lovely wife. You always seem like you're having a good time.
Yeah, I'm loving life right now. Having a good life, just enjoying everything. Had a great summer up in Canada. I mean, the weather's been just perfect every day. We suffer up in Calgary where I live. We suffer all winter with the 40 below weather and all that kind of stuff. But then in the summertime, it is just so nice. You didn't do humidity?
You didn't do any Hawaii this summer?
No, I sold my place in Hawaii.
Oh, really?
Got to be too much trouble.
So are you just Calgary full time now?
Just Calgary now. Yeah.
And where's your wife from?
San Francisco.
And how? So she's from Northern California. She's from generally the same neck of the woods, but obviously vastly different in Calgary. How does she like Calgary life?
She's learned to love Calgary. I guess San Francisco, if you know San Francisco and you live there all your life, can be kind of a cold place. I always think San Francisco is sunny and warm, but she's used to the cold, she says, and she's never had any problem adjusting to Calgary.
And first of all, I wanted to express my condolences about your brother, Smith passing away this summer, or earlier, spring, I guess. It was a few months ago already.
It was on my birthday, July.
It was July, 2 months ago. So obviously, I mean, unfortunately, loss is something that we've talked about this before, that you've become accustomed to as time goes on, but it's never easy to lose a brother.
No, it never is. And when you come from a big family, it's like pulling the pin out of the bottom of the pile.
Right.
You wonder who's next, and it really caused a lot of reflection in the family. And I think in a good way, it kind of brought a lot of the family together. We're all I think it kind of stunned everybody, and to watch Smith's courageous sort of fight with cancer and everything he went through. I think we all learned a lesson, and that we learned that life's pretty short, and you better make best use of what you got, and find your happiness and stuff. I think it, not that death's ever a good thing, but I mean, not of Smith's death. I think we bonded a little bit as a family again, and I think everyone started to realize what's most important in life, and not to lose track of that.
Well, big families do tend to have ups and downs, right? I mean, like, there's so many of you, and you can imagine when you have a small family, how easy it would be to sort of have those things happen, because relationships start, people get married, people get divorced, and things happen. So when you have that many children, I imagine that the family has times when you're tighter and times when you're less tight.
And when it's the oldest member of the family, 12 kids, 12 real brothers and sisters from the same mom and dad, so it's not like a half family mixed together kind of thing. It's one of those, how many people got 12 kids in a family?
Right.
How crazy is that? I mean, because that's pretty crazy. But losing the oldest one of your brothers is a wake-up call for the whole family in a way where you just start to you tell yourself or remind yourself to start appreciating things, because everyone's time, sooner or later, we're all going to run out.
Yeah, well, and it's tough. You lose the youngest way too soon, and now you lose the oldest. But at least how old was Smith?
Smith was 68.
68.
And the sad thing about Smith, and I don't want to make a big announcement for cancer screenings and stuff like that, but it's true. Him and I both got diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he didn't get checked in time.
Really?
That's all he had to do was get checked. It's just a blood test.
Right.
So men over 40, if you haven't had a blood test and got your PSA level checked for a cancer screening for prostate cancer, you got to get it checked, because it's the kind of thing, it's pretty easy to fix. It's like breast cancer. It's one of those.
If you catch it, it's doable.
If you catch it in time, you can pretty much have a normal life. You may have to get a mastectomy or whatever, but I mean, it's better than dying.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's an important message. Now, Greg, you've gotten now 10 minutes to digest. Is there one Bret Hart subject related to wrestling that you want to ask him about? He's your hero. He's sitting right in front of you.
Well, first I have a question for you though.
Wow.
When I said what I said earlier, did you know that he was going to be on his way here?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we talked about you this episode, because we were talking about, I said when Flair got sick, and God forbid, I was so worried about his health, and we're thinking, and now we're hearing positive news today. Looks like it's going the right direction. And when we had that fear that he could pass away, I had that moment of watching how people reacted to the news, and I said it really makes you think about how iconic Flair is and how big of an impact he is, and that he could be the greatest.
And I couldn't agree that he was the greatest.
Greg, even in this moment, of course, goes, well, he knows there's only one greatest.
Right, I couldn't do it.
But yeah, I was working you 100%, because I knew that Bret would be here.
And then we mentioned like the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, and Dip said that Ric Flair would be George Washington. And I said, well, if Rick is George Washington, then Bret has to be Lincoln, like 100%.
So where do you think you belong? You think you belong on the Bret? Would you put yourself on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling?
Oh yeah, I think I'd
Absolutely.
put myself up there and spray paint the other one.
A man who knows Bret Hart, no one knows Bret Hart better than Bret Hart.
But it's an interesting question of who would be the ones to go up there. Like, I don't know, you have Bruno up there, and then you have Hogan, and maybe Hogan's would be spray painted.
Yeah, Hogan's might be tough right now. But I was saying that wrestling's a tough game because, yeah, do you put Bruno? There are people who would put Lou Thez? I don't know how far back you go. Or a Gorgeous George. Do you just start in the modern era? Let's say it's modern era. Who would you put on the Mount Rushmore of the modern era, the post-Bruno era?
Well, I agree that's where I would start too. I mean, because wrestling, it really shifted, huge. There's such a big change in the industry from say about '84 to where we are today. So I mean, no disrespect to any of the wrestlers from before that, but they're hard to match up with the modern day wrestlers. I don't think, as far as that exposure and all that.
Right.
My mind, I mean, you'd think Hogan would be one of the first ones.
Of course.
Just because of how much impact he had. And Flair would be one. I'd like to hope that I would make it in there. But
You would.
Maybe
Easily.
Maybe it's like whether you count Rock or Austin, or both of them would be maybe possible. Maybe that's it.
What about Cena?
Cena, he has every right to be up there too, but I don't know. He only got 5 heads there.
We talk about, Hogan comes up a lot on the podcast, obviously, and you guys have had different moments as history has gone on. How now do you view Hogan as the wrestler? What do you think of him as not the guy, not the things he says otherwise, just as the wrestler?
I mean, he was such a huge personality. But I mean, I'm a guy that takes pride in the wrestling. Like, I'm a wrestler. I think I changed the industry.
I've said that here.
We know you
I
have, Greg.
changed it from the show business, like, to being what you look like, which was all that mattered in the 80s, 84, 85, 86. It was all about how you looked. It didn't matter how you wrestled. But when I got my run in the 90s, it had shifted, and it was about the wrestling now. It wasn't about, I wasn't the greatest character or the most flamboyant or splashiest looking or didn't have the greatest outfit kind of thing where you remembered me just how I looked with the entrance, how I walked out to the ring kind of thing. But you remember my matches. You remember the endings, the matches, the struggles. That's what I brought to wrestling. So, I mean, Hogan, as far as wrestling goes, he was really sort of one-dimensional in the sense that he had a certain kind of match that he had every night. Every match was the same kind of match. It was 10, 12-minute match where he did the same moves, same everything, same story, the hand behind the ear. And it was great. I remember like watching him going, this is so good. It's so exciting. And it kind of took wrestling in a whole different direction. But looking back on it today, you watch the matches back and you go, like if you get a Hulk Hogan's greatest matches DVD or something, it's like they're all kind of the same match.
Well, I will say this, though, about Hogan. My real respect for Hogan in terms of what he was capable of kind of came more from the NWO thing in terms of seeing how over he was as a heel, too. I mean, people really hated Hogan.
Yeah,
now, I'm not saying he changed his matches. He kind of just reversed the matches a bit. But he was pretty good, I thought, as a heel.
Yeah, he was. He certainly had a lot of heat, and that whole NWO thing is what it's hard to believe. When I go back to those days, like I can remember I took time off, and Sean had the belt, and he was the champion. But I remember like Austin was red hot, and Sean and Undertaker and myself. I was coming back part time and stuff, working at that time. I remember we were first time we started losing to WCW in the ratings. And I can remember watching Nitro and going, and then I'd watch Raw, like flip back and forth like fans do, and I go, there's no difference. There's such a huge difference. Like WWF was always, to me, so much better than even the worst wrestling on at that time period, 96, 97. Worst WWF matches were better than half the stuff they were doing in WCW. And WCW, you know, they lucked into some good storylines, NWO being one of them, that kind of didn't matter what they did, but it was more fun to watch Hogan as a bad guy and all those guys that came out with him, and Kevin Nash and Scott
Well,
Hall.
and let's be honest, those three stars were all three WWF stars.
Yeah, but they drew all the attention away from some pretty serious guys that were in their prime. Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Undertaker, Stone Cold. You know, we had some really, and Mankind. We had some, I mean, when I look back on them now, I wouldn't, there's no comparison between the two shows. I mean, Nitro was never anywhere near as good as Raw. I knew that when I went there, and it's true because it just wasn't, and they never had any kind of organization.
Was that hard for you to go there, and now you're a part of this show? You had to go there, and you're making good money, but you know the product isn't as good.
Yeah, no, but I went and I tried. It's like, I'm going to do my part. I'm gonna really gonna try to hit a home run every night for these guys and try to make a difference and show them what I can offer. And it was just so disappointing to see how chaotic and clueless. Clueless is a good word. They were a bunch of imbeciles. Like Eric Bischoff, maybe one of the stupidest guys I ever knew in wrestling. That had no. He was just such an idiot. I mean,
tell me how you feel, Brett. Don't hold back here on GP.
He was the stupidest guy in the world to be running WCW. He had no ability. He had no sense. He didn't know a good idea from a bad idea. He was just, I always use that example, like that little guy behind the Wizard of Oz, the guy that's behind the curtain. With making all the noise and stuff.
Yeah.
That's Eric Bischoff. He didn't have a clue if you had the greatest match in the world, if you gave him an Iron Man match with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels every night, he wouldn't even know what the hell it was.
Well, so is that ultimately where you think you're comparing that to a wrestling genius in Vince McMahon?
Yes.
And that's ultimately how it played out.
Yeah, and was just a question of this is a matter of time. I mean, I think there's a lot of guys that could have competed with Vince mentally. Like Vince had a lot of great ideas. There's lots of great guys. There's lots of guys that had good ideas about running wrestling, but WCW, I don't know. It was like a corrupted system where they had a bunch of idiots in charge, and you couldn't change it.
Do you stay in touch with Vince at all?
Yeah, I do. We bro, he texts me on my birthday and that kind of stuff. Or when my brother passed, he sent me a nice text. And we stay in touch when we need to. Like if I got something I need, or if I need pictures for a story, or anything I need from him, they kind of make it happen for me pretty fast.
I want to ask you one tough thing that I hadn't thought about asking you, but now it popped in my head, and I would like to bring it up because I'm such a huge fan of Owen. I've talked about that with you before. I know the situation with the family, and his widow is a complicated one. Do you think there will ever be any sort of peace, and we'll see Owen in the WWE Hall of Fame?
I hope so. I really do. Because I don't understand we all took Owen's tragic death pretty hard, and there was a few years where it was pretty touchy as far as like it was a sensitive topic. But as time fades, you start to soften, or at least I have, and I go, there's a lot of fans that love them. Why are we burying his legacy and everything he was and stood for? Like even that video they did about a year ago, they brought a DVD set, but it was all so closely, like they couldn't use certain pictures, they couldn't use, and no help, no input from the family, from Owen's side of the family. And I think, I'm not anyone to want to exploit Owen or anything like that, but I really think that he has every right to be remembered for what he contributed, and what kind of a wrestler and a guy he was, and how much the wrestlers loved him, how much the fans loved him. And for Martha to stand there, and that's his widow, and just refuse to let anybody ever enjoy anything about Owen ever again. Anything to do with wrestling, it's like not, she's so obtuse and sort of narrow-minded. And I've grown where I resent that. I think it's why are you making it such a lousy deal for everybody? Like everybody wants to remember him, and they all love him. And it's not like a disrespect. It's a respect that you're hiding from, and stopping everyone from enjoying his legacy and remembering him.
I'm sorry, Greg.
I was going to ask, did she have those feelings toward the industry like when he was alive, or is that something that came about?
It was only after he passed, but she probably, in her mind, I can remember Martha, Owen's widow, pounding her hands on the ring apron as a wrestling fan, watching me when I was a kid. And so she was a wrestling fan, and Owen loved wrestling. And
well, that part has changed a lot, right? Like I read Martha's book, and obviously, the feelings of the widow is incredibly important. All of us could agree, right? That goes without saying. And I understand the level. I mean, I can't even understand, but you can imagine the level of pain this has been, and has never changed. Her kids lost their dad, right? And she's impacted by it more than anyone. However, there's an image that's sort of been painted over time of like Owen really wanted out, and really, it's kind of made it look like he didn't love the business. And as his older brother, who he looked up to a lot, do you think that's inaccurate? And in fact, Owen, if he had his choice, would even with how he passed, would still love wrestling?
I see. That's how I see it. I see it like Owen was no different than me, and I would come home, and probably like you, when you get home later today, you always bitch about your job.
I bitch about everything.
I had to go. I spend all day there today, and I had to do this, or I had to. It's part of your job. Everyone complains about their jobs. So Owen complained a lot about his job, because you do. You just do about you. Anybody does. And but at the same time, and I know how Owen felt a lot of times, like, and I felt like leaving for the airport that first day. You're on the road now for 2 months or 6 weeks or something like that, and you're looking over at Owen, and he's like bummed out, and it's like we're flying to somewhere, and it's like you're goodbye happiness in the whole world kind of thing. And now I'm off to work for 2 months. I'm playing this character wrestler, and it's like this life you have. And you dread it sometimes. You really do, especially when you're leaving, like the plane's rolling down the tarmac at the Calgary airport, and you're leaving on this sort of work trip kind of thing. you do get resentful and kind of, and it's easy to go, he was always hated going, and it's like we all do. But the second those plane leaves, it's like you become this other person. And Owen loved that person. He loved being on the road. He loved. I believe today, if nothing had happened to Owen, I believe he'd still be working for WWF. I believe that Owen would have eventually become an announcer like JBL or Michael Cole. He was good at that. I remember he used to step in and kind of did some of that stuff. And I can remember him telling me, he goes, I like doing that stuff. And I'm like, so I think Owen would have found a nice niche for himself in WWF or WWE. And we wouldn't be talking about this stuff. Owen was a good enough wrestler that he might have become champion one time, might have been a world champion eventually.
Since we're talking ifs, if Owen hadn't passed, and you'd think he would still be with the WWE, WWF, do you think he would have been able to broker a deal that would see you back in the WWF?
They talked to me about it, but yeah, I think he could have for sure, because I ended up going anyway.
Right. It would have happened sooner.
Owen would have. I don't think it would have happened sooner. Owen would have. I remember him talking to me one time about trying to see if I'd come back, and I remember Rock. I remember him talking to me one time about. He goes, "Everything's changed, and we want to bring you back." And I just was so opposed to that at that time. But you soften. I think it took a long time for me to kind of mellow out about it, and now I'm when I look back on the fact that me and Sean buried the hatchet, best thing in the world, best thing to do.
Felt very freeing, right?
And anyone out there that's got a serious grudge or hate on somebody that they really, the best thing to do, if you can, find the courage to make peace with it, because it'll set you free. And I think that is what I always thought when I made that truce with Sean, that I was going to regret it. That about 6 months later, I'd like to punch that guy right out. And
it was the opposite?
Start again. But I sort of opened the door into forgiveness and kind of, let's forgive and move on. And you know what? It was such what I saw in Sean, like how much he appreciated, like it was like somebody taking their foot off his head kind of thing. Like he finally had peace and was happy and kind of good with me again, joking around. And I just remember like a year later going, that was a really good thing to do. It did good for everybody, good for me. Good for Sean. Got a lot of bad blood out of the way. And
do you ever see him or chat with him at all?
No, but we text each other, same thing on birthdays, or he'll wish me a Merry Christmas or something like that. And yeah, it's better. It's like why not have that than all the hostility and hate.
There's been a lot of conversation recently about like the real life heat between Sasha Banks and Alexa Bliss, and I really wanted them to have this match at SummerSlam, which they're having. And I talked to Alexa, who obviously, she's a kid and relatively new to wrestling, and I'm asking her about how you try to handle doing this, but no one knows better than you. How, when you have real heat with someone, can you tell us a little bit about how you harness it and turn it into great work? Because it seems like such a challenge to have to be in such close quarters with someone you really don't get along with.
Well, it's not easy to do. I mean, because work is one thing. Like it's like when you're working with somebody or you're wrestling somebody, it's all about trust and respect. I mean, you have to have this trust for each other and respect, even if you don't like each other. I've wrestled lots of wrestlers that I didn't like, but I trusted them, and that's a really important aspect of the industry, is how much you trust. You may not like them, but can you trust them?
And I'm sure there were people you liked who you didn't trust. That ever happen? A guy you like outside the ring, but you're like, oh, I don't want to get in with
There's
him.
some guys that are not, aren't necessarily going to be that. They're not going to help you out too much out there. They have limitations as wrestlers, and you may like them, but they may not. They may be stiff, and they may be forgetful, or guys that don't have good timing or good professionalism in there, and you got to work around it. I mean, I can remember wrestling Berserker one time in Calgary, which is always like, gee, that took me so long to get back up to Calgary, and I finally had a championship match, and that was with Berserker, which is
I always felt uncomfortable watching Berserker work.
Calgary, killed the town off, and put me with Berserker. I never worked with him, so I remember he threw me in the ropes of all things and he's a heel. He threw me in for a drop kick, hit me right in the stomach, right like in the pelvic bone with his both feet, drop kick as hard as he could, knocked all the wind out of me and almost broke my hips. Like he really potatoed the heck out of me. And I remember I loved Berserker. He was one of my favorite guys. But I remember he really, really hurt me, and the match was terrible, and everything was like. I remember I came back, and it was like I think it was George Steele came up to me and was like, "How was it?" And it's like, "It was good. It was good."
right.
It's coming along, you know. And because I loved him too much to say he was the shits, which he probably was. But you know, there's examples like that. But then there's guys that like Sean, you know, that was a really good worker, that would have a pissy attitude sometimes, and you just have to work around. I think with wrestling, and going back to your question, is that you always have to be professional in there. Like, you know, the thing that people always forget about, or they don't remember when they bring up the screw job and the whole issues with me and Shawn Michaels, was that it really, the whole tension, everything that happened between me and Shawn, I was always pretty friendly with Shawn, even though he was getting more isolated from, you know, ostracized by all the other wrestlers in the dressing room. He had a bit of an attitude problem. But I was on the road or going home a lot, so I was only sort of around it a little bit. And, you know, I remember it was in San Jose, and a couple weeks before the screw job happened, but maybe a month or so. And I went up to Shawn's when I first heard that we were wrestling at Montreal. It's like, first heard, you and Shawn at Survivor Series. It's like, how's that going to go? So I see Shawn, he's refereeing a triple threat match with me, Steve Austin, and Triple H in San Jose, and he refereed it, and he came back into my dressing room after the match, and this is where the whole thing started. And I remember I walked up to him, and I thought I was just going to clear the air with Shawn, because we had some tensions. And I said, Shawn, I just want you to know, we had a little scuffle in Hartford about 6 months before that, and I hadn't really seen much of him since then. And I came up to him, I said, Shawn, I heard it's you and me at Survivor Series. And he goes, yeah, I heard that today too. And it's like, I said, I just want you to know. I said, I have no problem dropping the belt. I have no problem. I'll lose to you any way they want. Whatever they want is no problem for me. And I said, I just want you to know that whatever happened between us, I said, when we step in the ring, I said, I'm always going to be a professional. I said, I never change. I'll never take liberties or punch you or hurt you on purpose. Or I said, I pride myself on being an absolute professional in the ring. And just so you know, I want you to know that you'd always be safe in the ring with me, despite whatever's happened in the past. But I remember in saying all that to Shawn, I remember he looked at me with a straight face and he goes, I appreciate that, but I just want you to know that I'm not willing to do the same thing for you. And that's, you know, when they say, why did the screw job happen? That's why it happened. Right there, that moment when I'm the champion and I come up and say, hey, I'm happy, you have no problem dropping the belt to you. For you to say to me, I'm not willing to do the same thing for you. That trust is gone. Trust is not there anymore, and
respect must be gone too.
It was. And so when you say, why was she so stubborn about not losing in Canada and all? It wasn't about Canada. It wasn't about losing. It was about respect. Yeah. And that's what. And people say, oh, I saw something on the internet about Gene Okerlund being interviewed by somebody, and you know, Bret Hart should have just done what he was told. Now, you know, I say all those guys can kiss my ass because they never walked in Bret Hart's shoes. They don't know what it was like to be me. They weren't there in the dressing room when Shawn said that to me. And if you were any kind of professional wrestler that had any kind of self-dignity, you wouldn't let somebody talk to you like that, especially if somebody that wasn't physically going to be able to do anything with someone like me.
And with all due respect too, like I said this before here too, you made Shawn Michaels. So
okay, Greg, honestly, you're gonna bury him again. I mean, let's say he's Shawn Michaels. Bret, you agree Shawn's an all-time great at this point, correct?
He was a great wrestler, but he had moments of unprofessionalism.
So what do you think about that, Greg? Can you handle that?
I didn't hear the word Shawn Michaels an all-time great wrestler. I mean,
he said he thinks he's a great wrestler.
Not an all-time great, and definitely not top 10, not in the Mount Rushmore. And it still doesn't change my point that you made Shawn Michaels. I mean, I'm sorry.
I think their careers were very beneficial to each other. And
Bret Hart had amazing matches with everybody. You heard about his classic with Berserker. He could have done it with anybody. It didn't have to be Shawn Michaels, but they needed Bret Hart.
Dipperstein, you said you have a question. It's very rare. Dip, please.
Yeah, the one thing I always hear, excuse me, the one thing I always like when I've heard interviews and I get like emotional about things that you said in the past, the one thing that stands out to me is when you talk about Mr. Perfect and Curt Hennig, and what a great worker he was, and what a friend to you he was. And I always wanted to hear more about that because he was one of my favorite. Like you, of course, and him were like two of my first favorites.
He was of all the guys I can think of that I could go back and have one match with. He'd be the first one, I think. Him or Owen. Him and Owen were very similar.
They were similar in
in
a
the
long
sense
way.
that
Yeah.
we could go out and they could parachute us into the ring without ever we don't even have to talk to each other.
Yeah.
We could just show up in the ring and it's like, and the referee could say we need an hour, and it'd be like easiest hour you ever do in your life. Like I could wrestle Curt in my sleep. In fact, I probably did most of the time. Whenever we wrestled each other, we had such good matches, and we would really sweat. Really, you lose a lot of fuel in those hour matches and stuff like that. And I was wrestling back in those days. I did about a 20-minute Broadway with him for about 2 years.
Yeah.
It seemed like every couple of days I was doing a Broadway with Curt when he was Intercontinental Champion. And we just had such great chemistry all the time. Always had a lot of fun in the ring, and it was always so easy, and he was always so safe that we just had that natural ability that you could just throw us together and with no planning, we wouldn't even have to talk to each other and still give you the best match on the card.
Where do you think that came from? Like you both being second generation wrestlers, or just being so close outside the ring?
Both. Just the respect growing up. Like you learn so much as a kid growing up, and any second generation or third generation wrestlers learn so much just watching. As a kid, you may not think you're learning wrestling, but by the time you're about 16, 18, like I had a pretty good idea about how pro wrestling worked. And almost like right from the day one, like I remember the guys that trained me going, geez, he wrestles like he's been doing this all his life. And I think probably Curt was the same, and lots of guys that were second or third generation wrestlers just have that because you've been watching it. You sort of know, you get it faster.
Was he close with Owen? I remember in the beginning, obviously Mania 5 and everything, when Owen was Blue Blazer and Curt had worked that program with him at the onset at the very, very beginning. Was that the beginning of the friendship for you guys, or was that a circle of friendship there?
I think he always, for one, the Axe, Curt's father got started out working for my dad in Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like your dad got a job with my dad and
Right.
had to start. So Curt always had a lot of respect for my dad, the family, the brothers, and when he wrestled Owen was a guy, everyone knew Owen was really talented, and he was a really good kid and a good wrestler. But they weren't really doing anything with him, and then when he wrestled him, I think if you watch that match, Curt gave Owen one of the better matches he ever had back in those days.
It was a great match.
Hey, listen, Greg, last question. We got to wrap
Last question.
with the Hitman.
You mentioned Curt's dad working for your dad. Did your fathers ever have a match? Because I remember like SummerSlam '91, you guys are jaw-jacking each other, and there was a discrepancy about whose father was the better wrestler.
Well, it was a good little joke. Like we had a good laugh about it. But the truth was, I think my dad was quite a bit older than my dad was like the next generation before Curt's dad. So there's a fair gap between their ages, even though they're both old timers.
And your dad did always think that he could ultimately stretch anyone at any point in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he might have stretched him in the basement, but I don't think he ever worked with him like in a territorial sense. By the time, funny enough, like when my dad left New York, he wrestled here in the 40s, 48.
You met your mom here, right?
I met my mom in Brooklyn and married her. And the thing about my dad was that once he got back to Canada, because he had the license in his name, the promoter couldn't wrestle. That was the rule. The promoter had to be a promoter and wasn't allowed to be on the cards. So my dad, who was a big star, or at least in that sense, was a polished wrestler and a reputation and all that, came back and had to kind of put his reputation and everything in the file and just be the boss with a suit and tie and all that kind of stuff. So he didn't have a lot of matches with guys that came along like Curt's dad and stuff after. But he certainly, I remember my father used to make a lot of beer, homemade beer in the dressing room or down in the basement. They had a big room filled with beer, and the wrestlers would drink beer, and they would go in there and wrestle. And my dad I don't think he was a big beer drinker, but he made it. I think my mom was the beer drinker. Believe it or not.
Hey guys, House of Glory Wrestling tonight, 5:30. meet and greet with Bret Hart. A great night of wrestling. Brian, thank you very much for making this happen, man. Do you want to go grab the mic real quick and just tell them who's on the card, what they can get tonight, real fast if they come out to House of Glory?
UFC Hall of Famer Stephen Bonner, Matt Riddle, Amazing Red, Anthony Gangone, Ken Broadway, House of Glory. You want to get any information, go to hogwrestling.net and Instagram and Twitter, HOG Wrestling.
Dude, thank you very much for the event, for putting on the great wrestling here in the city.
No problem.
And for bringing Bret through. Bret, you know you're my favorite. It's always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Always. Was meaning to give you a call, so it's good to see
Hey,
you.
you've always been a great guy for me at every time I've ever reached out. I appreciate it. You're the greatest. Best there is, best there was, best there ever will be. Bret Hart, ladies and gentlemen. And for the rest of our Cheap Heat predictions for a SummerSlam, you will catch them later. There'll be another episode for you tomorrow. Good night. Stay major.